The message arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in January 2287. Every screen on Earth displayed the same symbol. A circle with 73 stars arranged in a perfect spiral. The Galactic Council had finally noticed humanity. President Laura Bennett sat in her office, reading the translated message for the 5th time. The words were clear and direct. Humanity was invited to join the Council, but only if they could prove themselves worthy. They had to send a delegation to the Council's main station, and that delegation needed to show strength. Every species before them had sent warships and soldiers. The Council expected nothing less from Earth. The military advisors wanted to send the entire Pacific Fleet. General Philip Hayes stood before the cabinet, his uniform covered in medals, and argued that humanity needed to make a strong impression. He showed holographic displays of what other species had sent. The Krellian Empire had arrived with a ship that could destroy a moon. The Vexer Collective had brought weapons that could crack a planet's core. Strength was the only language the Council understood. But Laura had different ideas. She had spent her entire career bringing peace to Earth. The last war had ended 12 years ago, and she had been part of the team that made it happen. She had seen what weapons could do, and she had seen what happened when people finally put them down. She believed there was another way. The debate lasted for 3 weeks. Every nation on Earth had an opinion. Some wanted to send everything they had. Others wanted to decline the invitation entirely. A few brave voices suggested that maybe humanity should try something different. Maybe they should show the galaxy who they really were, not who they thought the galaxy wanted them to be. Laura made her decision on a quiet Sunday evening. She called a press conference that went out to every corner of Earth. Billions of people watched as she stood at the podium and announced that humanity would accept the Council's invitation. But they would not send weapons. They would not send fleets. They would send one person in one unarmed shuttle. The reaction was immediate and loud. Half the planet thought she had lost her mind. The other half wondered if she had a secret plan. Military leaders resigned in protest. Allied nations sent angry messages. But Laura stood firm. She explained her reasoning in simple terms. Humanity had spent thousands of years learning how to kill each other. They had become very good at it. But in the last century, they had learned something more important. They had learned how to stop. Now came the hard part. Choosing who to send. The person would be alone, unarmed, and facing the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. They needed someone brave, but not reckless. Someone smart, but not arrogant. Someone who understood that true strength came from within. Daniel Cross was working at a small mediation center in Seattle when he got the call. He had spent the last 20 years helping people resolve conflicts without violence. He had worked in war zones, corporate disputes, family arguments, and international incidents. He had a talent for seeing both sides of every problem and finding the path that neither side had considered. He was 42 years old, average height, with graying hair and calm brown eyes. He did not look like a hero. He looked like a teacher or a librarian. When Laura's assistant called and asked him to come to Washington, he thought it was about a pension dispute he had been mediating. The meeting with Laura changed his life. She explained the situation and asked if he would be willing to represent all of humanity before the Galactic Council. She told him there would be no weapons, no backup, and no guarantee of safety. She also told him why she thought he was the right choice. In 20 years of mediation, he had never failed to find a peaceful solution. He had walked into rooms full of angry people who wanted to hurt each other, and he had walked out with agreements and handshakes. Daniel was quiet for a long time. He thought about his daughter, who was studying medicine in Boston. He thought about his elderly mother, who still lived in the house where he grew up. He thought about all the people on Earth who were counting on him to do the impossible. Then he thought about all the wars he had helped end, all the families he had helped heal, and all the proof he had seen that people could choose peace. He said yes. The training began immediately. Daniel spent 2 months learning everything humanity knew about the Galactic Council. He studied their history, their cultures, and their languages. He learned that the council had maintained peace for 12,000 years, but it was a peace built on fear. The strong dominated the weak. The armed controlled the unarmed. It was a system that worked, but Daniel wondered if it was the only system that could work. The shuttle was built in orbit around the moon. They called it Simple Truth. It was small, just big enough for one person and basic life support. It had no weapons, no shields, and no armor. It was painted white, with a blue circle on the side, the symbol of Earth. Inside, the journey to the council station took 17 days. Daniel spent the time reviewing files and preparing himself mentally. The station appeared on his sensors before he could see it with his eyes. It was massive, the size of a small moon, covered in docking bays and communication arrays. Thousands of ships surrounded it, from tiny scouts to massive carriers that could hold entire armies. Simple Truth looked like a toy next to them. Daniel's communication panel lit up with incoming messages in dozens of languages. The computer translated them automatically. Most were warnings. Some were threats. A few were curious questions about why a human ship had no weapons signature. Daniel responded to the official channel with a simple message. He was the human ambassador, requesting permission to dock. There was a long silence. Daniel imagined the confusion his arrival must be causing. Finally, a docking bay number appeared on his screen. He guided Simple Truth through the massive station, past ships that could have destroyed him with a single shot, and landed in a bay that looked like it could hold 100 shuttles his size. The bay was empty, except for a reception committee. Daniel could see them through the viewport. A dozen beings from different species, all wearing what looked like military uniforms. They were watching his shuttle with weapons in their hands. Not pointed at him, but ready. Daniel took a deep breath, checked his appearance in the small mirror by the door, and opened the airlock. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet he could not identify. Daniel walked down the ramp, with his hands visible and empty. The reception committee stared at him. One of them, a creature that looked like a bear covered in blue scales, stepped forward. "You are the human delegation?" The voice came from a translation device on the creature's chest. "I am," Daniel replied. "My name is Daniel Cross. I'm here to speak with the council." The blue bear looked behind Daniel, clearly expecting more people. "Where are the rest?" "There is no rest. Just me." The committee members looked at each other. One of them, a thin being made of what looked like living crystal, made a sound like wind chimes. The translator converted it to laughter. "One unarmed human? This is Earth's delegation?" "Yes," Daniel said calmly. Another committee member, something with too many arms and eyes that glowed red, spoke up. "Where are your guards? Your weapons? Your proof of strength?" "I don't have any," Daniel answered. This caused more confusion. The blue bear made a gesture, and two guards moved forward. They scanned Daniel with devices that beeped and flashed. They found nothing except his clothes, his identification papers, and the river stone in his pocket. The guards looked at the blue bear and confirmed what their scans showed. The human was completely unarmed. "This is unprecedented," the blue bear said. "Insulting even. You will wait here while we contact the council." Daniel was taken to a waiting room. It was clearly designed for military delegations. The walls were covered in weapons displays from various species. The furniture was built for soldiers, hard and uncomfortable. Daniel sat on a bench that was too tall for him and waited. He had gotten very good at waiting during his years as a mediator. Hours passed. Daniel spent the time reading about council history on his portable computer. He learned that in 12,000 years, over 300 species had joined the council. Every single one had arrived with military force. The weakest delegation had brought 50 armed soldiers. The strongest had brought an entire battle fleet. The council's philosophy was simple. In a universe full of dangers, only the strong survived. Finally, the door opened. The blue bear returned with what looked like an official escort. "The council has agreed to see you," the creature said. "But be warned, human. They are not pleased." Daniel followed the escort through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The station was huge, and everywhere he looked, he saw soldiers and weapons. Species of every shape and size moved through the halls, but they all had one thing in common. They all looked dangerous. Daniel, in his simple blue suit, looked completely out of place. The council chamber was beyond anything Daniel had imagined. It was a perfect sphere, hundreds of meters across, with seating arranged in rings that went all the way around. Thousands of beings filled the seats, representatives from 73 different species. At the center of the sphere, floating in the middle of the space, was a platform where visitors could stand and address the council. Daniel was led to the platform. It was held up by some kind of invisible force. He stood there, alone, with thousands of eyes watching him from every direction. The silence was complete. Then a voice filled the chamber, coming from everywhere at once. "I am Xylara, overseer of the Galactic Council." The voice belonged to the crystal, being Daniel had seen earlier. She was much larger here, her form reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "You are Daniel Cross, representative of the species called humans?" "I am," Daniel replied. His voice was amplified somehow, carrying to every corner of the sphere. "You arrive alone and unarmed. This is either great courage or great foolishness. Which is it?" "Neither," Daniel said. "It's honesty. This is who we are." A sound like thunder rolled through the chamber. It took Daniel a moment to realize it was laughter. Xylara's crystalline form flickered. "You claim that humans are weak and defenseless? That you have no weapons, no warriors, no way to protect yourselves?" "No," Daniel said carefully. "I claim that we have learned there are different kinds of strength. We have weapons, we have warriors, but we've learned that real power comes from knowing when not to use them." This caused silence. Xylara seemed to consider his words. Then another voice spoke up, deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. A massive creature stood in one of the upper rings. It looked like the blue bear, but much larger, covered in scars. "I am Vec Thor of the Krellian Empire. Your words are pretty, human, but words mean nothing. The council respects only demonstrated power. You bring no ships, no soldiers, no proof of your species' ability to defend itself or contribute to council security. You are either prey or you are fools." Other voices joined in, agreeing with Vec Thor. The chamber filled with calls for Daniel to be dismissed, for Earth to be ignored until they learned proper protocols. Daniel stood quietly in the center of it all, waiting for the noise to die down. He had been in rooms like this before, just with fewer aliens. Xylara's voice cut through the chaos. "Silence!" The chamber obeyed instantly. "Daniel Cross, the council has traditions that have served us for 12,000 years. Every species must prove its worth. Since you bring no military demonstration, you will be tested in other ways." "I accept," Daniel said, without hesitation. "You do not know what the tests are," Xylara pointed out. The preparation chamber was cold and empty. Daniel was given basic survival gear: a water container, a thermal blanket, and an emergency beacon that would pull him out of the simulation if he was about to die. The guard who handed him the equipment was a young Vexer, a species that looked like purple insects standing upright. "The survival rate is 30% for trained soldiers," the guard said quietly. "For someone like you." "Well," the guard did not finish the sentence. "Thank you for the warning," Daniel said. "What's your name?" The guard seemed surprised by the question. "I am Zekmol. Why do you ask?" "Because if I survive, I'd like to remember who showed me kindness before the test." Zekmol's antennae twitched in what might have been embarrassment. "You are strange, human. Good luck." The simulation chamber was enormous. Daniel was fitted with sensors that would monitor his vital signs and broadcast everything to the council members who wanted to watch. Thousands had tuned in, mostly to see the unarmed human die in an entertaining way. The betting pools had him lasting less than an hour. The chamber door sealed. Reality shifted around Daniel in a way that made his stomach turn. When his vision cleared, he was standing in hell. The ground was black volcanic rock, cracked and glowing with heat from below. The sky was dark red, filled with ash and smoke. The temperature was easily over 400 degrees. His basic suit was keeping him alive, but he could feel the heat through it. Daniel looked around carefully. He was in a canyon with steep walls on 3 sides. The only exit was a narrow path that led deeper into the volcanic landscape. In the distance, he could hear sounds, roars, screams, and something that sounded like thunder. This was Krell Prime, the homeworld of Vector's species. It was designed to kill. He started walking, moving slowly and watching everything. The first lesson of survival was awareness. He needed to understand this environment before he could navigate it. He noticed that the cracks in the ground followed patterns. The gas vents that spewed poison always gave warning signs. A slight hissing sound, a change in the color of the rock. 2 hours in, he encountered his first predator. It was massive, like a crocodile mixed with a bear, with scales that glowed red from internal heat. It was easily 3 times his size. The creature spotted him and roared, showing teeth designed to crush bone. Daniel's instinct was to run, but he knew that was wrong. Predators chased things that ran. Instead, he stood still and watched the creature. It was favoring its right front leg. There was an old scar along its side. This was an experienced hunter, but also an injured one. It would not waste energy on prey that might escape. He moved slowly, keeping his eyes on the creature but not staring directly at it. Direct eye contact was a challenge in most species. He angled his body to the side, making himself look smaller. He kept his movements predictable and calm. The creature watched him with intelligent eyes, deciding whether he was worth the effort. For 20 minutes, they stood in a silent standoff. Daniel's suit was running hot, and he was sweating heavily. But he did not run, did not shout, did not threaten. Finally, the creature snorted, turned, and walked away. It had found easier prey elsewhere. Daniel let out a breath he did not know he was holding. On the council station, Vector watched the broadcast with narrowed eyes. Interesting, the Krellian warrior muttered. The hours continued. Daniel encountered poison vents and avoided them by reading the ground. He found a shallow cave that offered some shade from the brutal heat, and rested there for an hour. Conserving his energy, he saw other predators but avoided them by staying quiet and moving during times when they were less active. At the 8-hour mark, he discovered water. It was boiling hot, and probably poisonous, but it told him where the ecosystem's center was. Life needed water, even in a place like this. He followed the water source upstream and found an area where the temperature was slightly lower, where strange plants grew in the rocks. At the 10-hour mark, exhaustion was setting in. His suit's cooling system was struggling. He was dehydrated despite drinking from his container. His legs were shaking, but he kept moving, kept observing, kept learning. He saw how the native creatures survived here. They moved in the shadows. They knew which plants were safe. They understood the rhythm of this hellish place. The final 2 hours were the hardest. Daniel found a relatively safe spot between 2 large rocks and settled in to wait. He was far enough from the main predator paths and high enough to avoid most of the gas vents. He watched the dark red sky and thought about Earth. He wondered if people were watching. He hoped his daughter was not too worried. The simulation ended exactly at 12 hours. The hellish landscape dissolved around him, and he was back in the chamber. Medical staff rushed in to check his vitals. Daniel collapsed to his knees, breathing hard. His suit was scorched in places, and he had lost nearly 10 pounds in sweat. But he was alive. Xylara's voice filled the chamber. Daniel Cross has survived the test of survival. He will proceed to the second trial after a recovery period. In the viewing areas, the reaction was mixed. Some council members were impressed. Others claimed he had just been lucky. Vector was silent, studying the replay of Daniel's encounter with the Predator. The human had shown something the Krellian had not expected: understanding instead of fear. Daniel was taken to a medical bay, where he was rehydrated and treated for heat exhaustion. Zekmal visited him there, bringing food from the station's cafeteria. "You survived," the young Vexer said, sounding genuinely happy. "No one thought you would." "I noticed," Daniel said with a tired smile. "What's the second trial?" "Combat. You will face a council warrior in the arena. It has never been won without weapons." Zekmal's antennae drooped. "I am sorry, Daniel Cross. You seem kind for a human. I do not wish to see you hurt." "Thank you, Zekmal. But I did not come this far to give up." 3 days later, Daniel stood in the arena. It was a massive circular space with seating for tens of thousands. Every seat was full. The entire council wanted to see this fight. On one side of the arena stood Daniel, wearing light armor that had been provided but carrying no weapons. On the other side stood Zekmal. The young Vexer had volunteered, wanting to face the human himself. He wore full combat armor and carried plasma blades that glowed bright purple. He was trained, armed, and had every advantage. But as he looked across the arena at Daniel's calm face, Zekmal felt something strange. He felt doubt. Xylara's voice boomed across the arena. "Let the test of combat begin." Zekmal charged forward, his blades ready. This should be over in seconds. But Daniel did not try to fight. He moved, not running away but stepping aside at the last possible moment. Zekmal's blade cut through empty air. "Why did you volunteer, Zekmal?" Daniel asked calmly. The question surprised the Vexer so much that he hesitated. What? 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 Why did you volunteer to fight me? Was it to prove yourself?" Zekmal attacked again. And again Daniel evaded. "I don't have to answer you." "You don't," Daniel agreed, moving smoothly out of range. "But I'm curious. You were kind to me before the survival test. You brought me food after I recovered. You don't seem like someone who wants to hurt others." The crowd was getting restless. They wanted blood, wanted action. But all they saw was Daniel talking and moving, while Zekmal grew more frustrated. The young Vexer attacked faster, harder, trying to land a hit. But Daniel stayed just out of reach. His movements economical and precise. "My family expects it," Zekmal finally shouted, anger and confusion in his voice. "I am the youngest. I have to prove I am strong. And fighting an unarmed opponent proves that?" Daniel asked gently. Zekmal stopped mid-charge. The question hit harder than any physical blow. He stood there, breathing hard, his blades trembling in his hands. In the stands, his family members watched with complicated expressions. "You are strong, Zekmal," Daniel continued. "You volunteered to help the council understand humanity. That takes courage. But strength is not just about winning fights. It is about knowing who you are and being honest about it." For another 30 minutes, this continued. Zekmal would attack, and Daniel would evade and talk. He asked about Zekmal's homeworld, his dreams, his fears. Slowly, the combat became a conversation. The Vexer's attacks lost their fury and became almost half-hearted. Finally, Zekmal stopped completely. He was exhausted, not from the fighting, but from the emotional weight of Daniel's questions. He dropped his blades and fell to his knees. The council chambers were packed for the third trial. Every representative was present, and thousands more watched via broadcast across the galaxy. Daniel Cross, the unarmed human, had survived the unsurvivable and won a fight without fighting. Now came the final test. And it was the one that broke even the strongest warriors. The test of will was ancient, designed by the council's founders. 13 of the eldest members would join their minds and probe the candidate's consciousness. They would find every fear, every doubt, every weakness. They would show the candidate visions of their worst nightmares made real. Some never recovered, their minds shattered by what they experienced. Daniel sat in the center of the chamber on a simple chair. Around him, arranged in a circle, sat the 13 elders. They were the oldest beings in the council. Species that had been traveling the stars when humans were still living in caves. Xylara was among them, her crystalline form pulsing with gathered energy. Daniel Cross. Xylara's voice was formal and cold. This final trial will test not your body but your mind and spirit. We will see the truth of who you are, and what humanity represents. If you wish to withdraw, now is your last chance. Daniel looked at the 13 ancient beings surrounding him. I'm ready. The elders closed their eyes or equivalent organs. The chamber's lights dimmed. Then the assault began. It was not physical pain, but something worse. Daniel felt foreign presences pushing into his thoughts, peeling back layers of his consciousness like unwrapping a gift. It was invasive and terrifying, but he forced himself to remain calm. The vision started. He saw Earth burning, continents turned to glass by weapons from space. He saw his daughter screaming as aliens dragged her away. He saw humanity enslaved, billions of people in chains, serving cruel masters who laughed at their weakness. The visions were incredibly detailed, crafted by minds that had spent thousands of years learning how to break others. But Daniel had expected this. He had prepared not by building mental walls, but by accepting the fear. Yes, these things could happen. Yes, the galaxy could be cruel. But these were possibilities, not certainties. He acknowledged the fear and let it pass through him like water through a net. The elders pushed harder. They showed him personal failures. They dug up memories of every mistake he had made in his life. The time he had failed to save a marriage during mediation, and the couple divorced bitterly. The negotiations he had lost, leading to violence. The moments when his words had not been enough, when people had hurt each other despite his best efforts. Daniel felt tears running down his face, but he did not break. He had made mistakes. He had failed. But he had also learned from those failures. They had taught him how to do better, how to listen more carefully, how to find the paths that he had missed before. The elders were surprised. Most candidates by now were screaming or catatonic. But Daniel remained present, aware, accepting what they showed him, without letting it destroy him. So they changed tactics. Instead of showing him horrors, they showed him his deepest desire. He saw a galaxy at peace, species working together, sharing knowledge and resources. No wars, no fear, no weapons needed. He saw humans walking freely on 1,000 worlds, welcomed and respected. He saw his daughter grown old and happy, telling her grandchildren about the day her father changed the universe. It was beautiful, perfect, and completely seductive. The trap was obvious to Daniel. This vision was not real. It was a fantasy designed to make him yearn for something impossible, to break him with hope instead of fear. He smiled sadly and let this vision pass too. Peace was possible, but it would not be perfect. It would not be easy. It would require work, compromise, and constant effort. The dream they offered was too simple, too clean. Real peace was messy. The elders were now deeply confused. They conferred among themselves through their mental link. This human was unlike anything they had encountered. His mind was open yet unbreakable. He acknowledged fear without being controlled by it. He recognized hope without being blinded by it. How? Elder Thomun, a being of pure thought that existed as patterns of light, spoke directly into Daniel's mind. "What are you?" Daniel answered aloud, his voice steady. "I'm just a person. But I come from a species that has survived everything. We've faced extinction dozens of times, and always found a way forward. We've hurt each other in every way imaginable and learned to forgive. We've discovered how to destroy our world 1,000 times over and chose instead to protect it. We've seen the worst of what we can be and decided to become better. The elders stopped their assault and instead simply listened to Daniel's thoughts. What they found astonished them. They saw humanity's history. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. They saw wars that killed millions. They saw weapons that could end all life. They saw cruelty, slavery, genocide, and every horror that intelligent beings could inflict on each other. But they also saw what came after. They saw enemies becoming friends. They saw people who had every reason to hate each other, choosing to build together instead. They saw cities rebuilt on battlefields. They saw children playing in places where bombs had fallen. They saw generation after generation choosing hope over revenge, forgiveness over vengeance, cooperation over domination. Elder Thomun recoiled from what he was seeing. He spoke aloud for the first time in 300 years, his voice like music made of starlight. This species has earned the right to destroy itself 100 times over, yet they chose differently. They mastered nuclear fire and put it down. They decoded their own genetics and used it to heal rather than to create weapons. They reached for the stars, not to conquer, but to explore. What manner of beings are these? Another elder, a creature called the Ancient One, that looked like a mountain given life, spoke in a voice like grinding rocks. They are stronger than us, not in weapons or numbers, but in spirit. They have faced the darkness within themselves and won. We who are old have forgotten that the hardest enemy to defeat is the one you see in the mirror. Xylara's crystalline form was blazing with light now, pulsing in patterns that indicated deep thought. She withdrew from Daniel's mind and spoke to the full council. For 12,000 years, we have measured strength by the capacity to destroy. We have built our peace on the threat of violence. We have survived by being strong enough to kill any who opposed us. But this human shows us a different kind of strength. The strength to survive yourselves. The strength to choose peace when war would be easier. The strength to send one unarmed person to represent an entire world because you trust in something greater than weapons. The chamber was silent. Daniel sat quietly, exhausted from the mental ordeal but still present. He had not broken, had not begged, had not retreated into madness. He had simply remained himself and let the elders see the truth of what humanity had become. Vector stood in his seat, his massive form radiating respect. I have conquered 12 worlds. I have led armies that numbered in the millions. I have killed enemies with my bare hands and watched planets burn at my command. But I have never had the courage to do what this human has done, to stand unarmed before the unknown and trust in nothing but his own conviction. The humans have passed the trial. They have earned their place in the council. One by one, other species began to stand. Some were moved by what the elders had shared through the mental link. Others simply recognized that something profound had happened. The old ways of measuring strength had been challenged, and they could not deny what they had witnessed. Not everyone agreed. Some species argued that this changed nothing, that weapons and military might were still the only reliable foundations for peace. But they were shouted down by others who were tired of the endless arms races, the constant fear, the knowledge that one mistake could lead to extinction. Xylara called for the vote. It was not just a vote on whether to accept humanity into the council. It had become a vote on what the council itself would become. Would they continue as they had for 12,000 years? Or would they dare to try something new? The votes were cast electronically, displayed on the chamber's main screen for all to see. Species that had mocked humanity now voted in their favor. Species that had initially supported them now voted against, fearing change. The numbers climbed slowly, each vote representing not just one species but entire civilizations making a choice about their future. When the final vote was tallied, humanity had been accepted. Not by a unanimous decision, but by a clear majority. Earth would have a voice in the Galactic Council. But more than that, something fundamental had shifted. The universe had seen an alternative to the way things had always been. Zylara approached Daniel as he stood on shaking legs. "You have won, Daniel Cross. But victory brings responsibility. The Council has decided that you will establish a new division within our organization, the Diplomatic Corps of First Contact. You will teach others your methods. You will show the galaxy that there is more than one path to peace." Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. "I'll do my best. But I'll need help. This can't be just a human thing. Every species has wisdom to offer." "Agreed," Zylara said. "We will begin immediately." Daniel spent the next 3 months establishing the Diplomatic Corps of First Contact. His office was a small room in the Council Station's civilian section, far from the military areas where most Council business happened. He had insisted on that. The new Corps needed to be separate from the old ways, even symbolically. His first recruits were an odd group. Zekmal was there, of course, along with 2 other Vexer who had been inspired by his story. A Krellian named Korvan had resigned from the military to join, shocking his entire clan. There was Lyra, a Luminar scientist who had studied conflict resolution in secret for decades. A human named Kate Morrison arrived from Earth, a former soldier turned peace activist. Others came slowly, curious about this new idea. The first challenge was creating a training program. Daniel could not just teach them to be like him. Each species was different, with different psychology, different communication styles, different concepts of conflict and resolution. What worked for humans might fail completely for others. They started with the basics. Listening. Truly listening. Not just waiting for your turn to speak. Understanding that every conflict had at least 2 perspectives, often more. Learning to see patterns in behavior, to recognize fear hiding behind anger, to find the needs underneath the demands. Vekthor visited one afternoon, surprising everyone. The massive Krellian warrior had to duck to enter Daniel's small office. "I wish to observe your training," he said, without preamble. "You're welcome to join us," Daniel replied. "But you'll have to participate. Not just observe." Vekthor's equivalent of a laugh rumbled through the room. "Very well, human. Teach me your peaceful ways." The training session that day focused on a practical exercise. Daniel had obtained permission to mediate an actual dispute between 2 mining companies from different species. It was a minor conflict over resource rights on an asteroid, but it had dragged on for years and was about to turn violent. The representatives arrived angry and ready to fight. On one side was a Targelian, a species that resembled armored beetles. On the other was a Silvari, beings made of living metal. They had been arguing through lawyers and intermediaries for so long that they barely remembered why they hated each other. Daniel introduced Zekmal as the mediator. The young Vexer looked terrified, but stepped forward. Daniel had coached him, but would not interfere unless absolutely necessary. This was real training, with real stakes. Zekmal started by asking each representative to explain their position. Simple enough. But he added something Daniel had taught him. He asked each side to also explain what they thought the other side wanted. This forced them to actually think about their opponent's perspective. The Targelian representative was shocked to hear the Silvari accurately describe their need for the asteroid's rare minerals to repair their aging infrastructure. The Silvari was equally surprised to hear the Targelian explain their need for the same minerals to feed their growing population. Both had assumed the other was simply being greedy. With this understanding established, Zekmal asked the question Daniel had taught him was most important. What do you need the outcome to be? And what are you willing to give to achieve it? It took 6 hours. There were moments of anger, accusations, and near walkouts. But Zekmal remained calm, kept asking questions, kept pointing out common ground. Daniel watched from the side of the room, with Vekthor standing beside him like a mountain. "This is exhausting." the Krellian warrior muttered. Fighting is quicker. But does fighting solve the problem or just silence it? Daniel asked quietly. Vector was silent for a long moment. In my culture, we believe that conflict is natural. The strong take what they need. The weak adapt or die. And how many wars has your culture fought? Daniel asked. Hundreds. Do you ever win the last one? Vector turned to look at Daniel with new understanding in his eyes. No. There is always another war. Vector. Exactly. Because fighting does not solve problems. It just determines who has to live with the problem, and who gets to ignore it. By the end of the session, Zekmol had helped the two companies reach an agreement. They would share the asteroid, dividing the extraction rights based on their actual needs rather than their legal claims. It was not perfect, and both sides had to compromise, but it was fair. More importantly, they left the room willing to work together rather than destroy each other. Zekmol collapsed into a chair, exhausted but smiling. You did, Daniel agreed. How do you feel? Like I just fought a battle, Zekmol said. But nobody got hurt. Welcome to the real work, Daniel said. Word of the successful mediation spread. More disputes were brought to the diplomatic corps. Not the big ones yet, but small conflicts that had been festering. Trade disagreements, border disputes between minor colonies, arguments over cultural misunderstandings. Each one was a chance for Daniel's students to practice and learn. Kate Morrison proved particularly skilled at working with humans who were struggling to adjust to galactic society. Earth had sent thousands of people to the Council Station and other locations, and many were experiencing culture shock. Kate helped them process their fear and confusion without turning it into aggression or withdrawal. Lyra developed a whole curriculum on nonverbal communication. She had discovered that many conflicts arose from simple misunderstandings about body language and social cues. What looked like a threat to one species might be a greeting to another. Her classes helped Corps members recognize these differences and avoid accidental escalation. Corvan, the Krellian warrior, brought unexpected value. He understood military thinking and could translate diplomatic concepts into terms that soldiers respected. When a group of Krellian officers complained that the diplomatic corps was teaching weakness, Corvan challenged them to a demonstration. He brought Daniel into a room full of battle-hardened Krellian warriors and told them to try to make the human angry. For an hour, they insulted him, threatened him, questioned his courage and his species' worth. Daniel sat calmly through it all, occasionally asking them why they felt the need to provoke him. The warriors were frustrated and confused by the end. One young officer, similar to Corvan before he joined the Corps, demanded to know how Daniel could just sit there and take it. Because your words only have the power I give them, Daniel explained. You're trying to make me react emotionally so I'll stop thinking clearly. But I'm not playing that game. I'm staying focused on what's actually important. And what is important? The officer demanded. Understanding why you're so angry. Daniel said gently. What happened that made you need to prove yourself this way? The question hit like a physical blow. The young officer's aggression crumbled, and beneath it was something Daniel had suspected. Fear. Fear of being weak, of failing, of not measuring up to the legends of Krellian strength. Once that fear was acknowledged, it could be addressed. The officer left the demonstration, thoughtful, rather than angry. Vector had watched the whole thing. Afterward, he approached Daniel privately. You are teaching my people something we have forgotten. That strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen. Your people are warriors, Daniel said. That's not wrong. The galaxy needs protectors. But maybe warriors can be more than just fighters. Maybe they can be defenders of peace, not just preparers for war. The old Krellian was quiet for a long time. I have spent my life conquering. I am too old to change completely. But perhaps I can help the young ones find a different path. Would your diplomatic corps accept a Krellian advisor? We would be honored, Daniel said. 6 months after the trials, The diplomatic corps had grown to 47 members from 19 different species. They had successfully mediated 32 disputes. More importantly, they had started changing attitudes. Species that had previously met every first contact with weapons now sometimes tried talking first. Laura Bennett visited from Earth, bringing with her a delegation of human diplomats who wanted to learn from Daniel's work. She found him in the middle of teaching a class on emotional regulation, showing a group of young beings from various species how to recognize and manage their own stress responses during difficult negotiations. After the class, they walked through the station together. Laura noticed how different it felt from her first visit. There were still soldiers and weapons everywhere, but there were also more civilians, more trade, more cultural exchanges. The fear had not disappeared, but it had lessened. "You've started something remarkable," Laura told him. "Earth wants to expand the program. We're proposing that every human ship traveling into deep space carry a trained diplomatic corps member." "That's good," Daniel said. "But it can't just be humans. That's the whole point. Every species brings something valuable to peacekeeping. Humans have our experiences with self-directed change. Krellians understand honor and respect. Vexer are naturally empathetic. Luminar think in long-term patterns. We're stronger together." "Right. I know." Laura smiled. "That's why I'm also proposing that the Council make the Diplomatic Corps an official branch, equal in status to the military forces. You would have real authority to intervene in conflicts before they escalate to war." Daniel stopped walking. "That's a big step. A lot of species won't like it. A lot of species are tired of war," Laura countered. "They've been watching what you're doing. They see that it works. Not always. Not perfectly. But better than the alternative." The proposal went before the Council 2 weeks later. The debate was fierce. Military-focused species argued that diplomacy without the threat of force was meaningless. Others countered that force without diplomacy was just sanctioned murder. Species shared statistics showing that conflicts mediated by the diplomatic corps cost less, ended faster, and had lower rates of recurring violence. Xylara, who had become one of the corps' strongest supporters, made the final argument. "For 12,000 years, we have maintained peace through fear. It has worked, but at tremendous cost. We have spent fortunes on weapons. We have lost countless lives in wars that achieved nothing. We have created a galaxy where everyone sleeps with one eye open, waiting for the next conflict. The diplomatic corps offers an alternative, not a replacement for our defenses, but a first line of response that might prevent the need for those defenses. If we do not try, we are cowards hiding behind our guns." The vote was closer than the one to admit humanity, but it passed. The Diplomatic Corps of First Contact became an official council institution. Daniel was named its first director, though he insisted on a council of advisors representing all member species. Vecthor was appointed military liaison, a new position designed to help the Corps and the armed forces work together. That night, Daniel stood at an observation window, looking out at the stars. Zekmol found him there. "You look tired, Director," the young Vexer said. "Just thinking," Daniel replied. 6 months ago, I was mediating property disputes in Seattle. Now I'm responsible for changing how an entire galaxy approaches conflict. It's overwhelming." "You are not alone," Zekmol reminded him. "You taught us that." A year after Daniel's trials, the Diplomatic Corps faced its greatest test. A conflict had erupted on the border between Krellian space and territory claimed by the Xanthari Dominion, a species that had joined the Council only 20 years earlier. The Xanthari were aggressive expansionists, barely contained by Council treaties they resented. A Xanthari military fleet had crossed into a disputed system and destroyed a Krellian mining outpost, killing 300 workers. The Krellian Empire responded by mobilizing its battle fleets. Within days, both sides had enough firepower assembled to devastate entire planets. The Council's military forces were preparing for intervention, which would mean a 3-way war. Daniel received the emergency summons at 3 in the morning, station time. He arrived at the Council's crisis center to find it in chaos. Military commanders were shouting orders. Diplomats from various species were trying to negotiate through official channels and getting nowhere. Zylara was at the center of it all, her crystalline form flickering rapidly with stress. "Director Cross," she said when she saw him, "the Xanthari are refusing all communication. The Krellians are demanding immediate justice. We have 72 hours before the fleets engage. Once that happens, we will have our first major war in 300 years. What does the diplomatic corps recommend?" asked General Carr then, the Council's military commander. "Let me talk to them," Daniel said simply. The room went quiet. General Carr then, a massive being that looked like a four-armed bear, stared at Daniel. "Talk to them? Director, they destroyed a civilian outpost. They are preparing for war. What can words do against that?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But we have to try. That's what the diplomatic corps exists for. To try. Before we shoot." Vector, who had been consulting with other Krellian commanders, approached. "My people want blood, Daniel Cross. 300 dead, including children of workers who had brought families to the outpost." "They can't," Daniel said quietly. "Nothing can bring those people back. But more deaths won't honor them. Let me try to stop this, before thousands more die." The debate raged for an hour. Finally, Zylara made the decision. Director Cross will have 48 hours. If he fails, the military will proceed with intervention. Does everyone agree? The agreement was reluctant but unanimous. Daniel immediately assembled his team. Zekmol, Kate Morrison, Lyra, and Korvan joined him. They would take a small diplomatic shuttle into the disputed system and attempt to make contact with both sides. The journey was tense. They could see both fleets on their sensors. Hundreds of ships ready to destroy each other. The Krellian fleet commander, an old warrior named Thakvar, allowed them to pass but sent a message. "You have 2 days, human. Then I will avenge my people." The Xanthari were harder to approach. They fired warning shots that came within meters of the shuttle. It took 6 hours of repeated attempts before they finally agreed to let Daniel's team aboard their flagship. The condition was harsh. Only Daniel could come, and he would be considered a prisoner unless he could justify his presence. Daniel agreed. Kate gripped his arm before he left the shuttle. "Be careful. These people are looking for an excuse to fight." "I know," Daniel said. "That's why I have to give them something else to look for." The Xanthari flagship was dark and angular, designed to intimidate. Daniel was escorted by armed guards to meet their commander, Supreme Leader Veklash. The Xanthari were reptilian, with scales that shifted colors based on their emotions. Right now, Veklash's scales were deep red, the color of rage. "You are the human who speaks of peace," Veklash said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You waste my time. The Krellians have occupied that system for decades, preventing our expansion. We took what was rightfully ours. You killed 300 civilians," Daniel said calmly, "including children, casualties of war. The Krellians should not have had families in a disputed zone." Daniel took a breath. This was the hard part. Veklash wanted a fight. He had been raised in a culture that valued conquest. But Daniel had studied the Xanthari files. He knew something important. "Supreme Leader, I've read your history. The Xanthari homeworld was invaded twice before you developed space travel. Your people know what it's like to be the victims of aggression." Veklash's scales shifted to orange, surprise mixed with anger. "Do not presume to lecture me about my own history, human. I'm not lecturing. I'm trying to understand. Your people fought off invaders through unity and determination. You built a civilization dedicated to never being victims again. That's admirable. But somewhere along the way, you became what you fought against. We are nothing like them." Veklash roared. "You just killed 300 civilians to claim territory. Daniel said quietly. How is that different from what was done to your ancestors? The question hung in the air. Veklash's scales cycled through several colors rapidly. Rage, confusion, something that might have been shame. We are strong now. The strong take what they need. The strong protect what they have, Daniel corrected. The strong build rather than destroy. Supreme Leader, you have the power to start a war that will kill millions. That's strength, I suppose. But do you have the strength to find another way? There is no other way. The Krellians will never negotiate. Let me try to make them, Daniel said. Give me a chance to find a solution that doesn't end with your people and theirs killing each other for the next century. Veklash was silent for a long time. Finally, his scales shifted to blue. Thoughtfulness. You have 24 hours. Well, but Daniel Cross, if you fail, we will not wait for the Council's military to intervene. We will strike first. Daniel was escorted back to his shuttle. Corvan met him at the airlock. How did it go? Better than I feared, worse than I hoped, Daniel said. We have 1 day. Take me to the Krellian fleet. Thakvar, the Krellian fleet commander, was a legend among his people. He had fought in more battles than most warriors saw in a lifetime. His ship was covered in tally marks, one for each enemy vessel destroyed. He received Daniel in his ready room, surrounded by weapons and trophies from conquered enemies. Speak quickly, human, Thakvar said. My warriors are eager for justice. Justice or vengeance? Daniel asked. They are the same when 300 of my people are dead. No, they're not, Daniel said. Justice seeks to prevent future harm. Vengeance only satisfies anger. Commander, I know Krellian culture values honor above all else. Is it honorable to start a war that will kill thousands to avenge 300? It is honorable to defend Krellian lives and territory, Thakvar replied. The Xanthari attacked us. We must respond. With war? Or with something better? His people were invaded twice in their history. They're expanding aggressively because they're terrified of being vulnerable again. He's making a mistake, but it's one born from trauma, not evil. I do not care about his trauma. I care about my dead. And you should. Daniel agreed. They deserve justice. But what if we could get them real justice? What if we could create a situation where this never happens again? Where both sides feel secure enough that they don't need to kill each other? Thakvar's expression was skeptical. How? I don't know yet, Daniel admitted. But I have an idea. Give me 12 hours to work out the details. Please, Commander. You can always choose war. But once you do, you can't unchoose it. The old warrior studied Daniel for a long moment. You are either very brave or very foolish. Human. 12 hours. But if your plan fails, I will burn every Xanthari ship in this system. Daniel returned to his shuttle and gathered his team. They worked through the night, developing a proposal. It had to address the Krellian need for justice, the Xanthari need for security, and the Council's need to prevent war. It was the most complex mediation Daniel had ever attempted. By dawn, they had something. It was not perfect, but it might work. Daniel sent the proposal to both fleets simultaneously, then waited in the agonizing silence while both commanders reviewed it. The proposal had 3 parts. First, the Xanthari would formally admit responsibility for the attack and pay reparations to the families of the dead. Second, the disputed system would become neutral territory, administered by the Council, with resources shared equally between Krellian and Xanthari interests. Third, and most importantly, both empires would establish a joint security force to patrol their border, with Council observers. This would give the Xanthari the security they craved and the Krellians the certainty that another attack would not happen. 2 hours passed. Then, 4. Daniel's team sat in tense silence, knowing that at any moment, the shooting could start. Zekmol kept checking the sensors, watching the two fleets drift closer to each other. Finally, a message came from Thakvar. The Krellian Empire finds these terms acceptable, with one addition. Veklash must personally deliver the apology to the families of the dead. Before Daniel could respond, a message came from Veklash. The Xanthari Dominion accepts, with one condition. Thakvar must acknowledge that the system was legitimately disputed, not purely Krellian territory. Daniel closed his eyes and thought carefully. Both additions were about pride. Both leaders needed to feel they had gained something, not just compromised. This was delicate. He spent the next 6 hours shuttling between the two flagships, negotiating the exact wording of the agreement. Veklash would apologize in person, but Thakvar would publicly acknowledge the dispute's legitimacy. The reparations would be substantial, but not crippling. The Joint Security Force would have equal representation from both sides. It almost fell apart 3 times. Once, when a Krellian officer demanded the Xanthari supreme leader stand trial for war crimes. Once, when a Xanthari commander suggested that the families of the dead had made poor choices by living in a disputed zone. Each time, Daniel had to calm tempers, reframe arguments, and find the words that let both sides move forward without losing face. As the deadline approached, with only 1 hour left before the Council military would intervene, both commanders finally signed the agreement. The signatures were transmitted to the Council Crisis Center, where exhausted diplomats and relieved military officers watched the two massive fleets begin to stand down. Daniel slumped in his chair on the shuttle, utterly exhausted. Kate brought him water and a food packet. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Daniel corrected. Lyra's research on Xanthari history was crucial. Corvan's understanding of Krellian honor made the difference. Zekmol kept us all calm when I was losing hope. This was never just me. 2 weeks later, the formal ceremony took place at a neutral station. Veklash stood before the assembled families of the Krellian dead and offered an apology that was broadcast across both empires. His scales showed genuine remorse, shifting to colors that Xanthari culture associated with deep shame and regret. Many of the families were not ready to forgive, but some appreciated the acknowledgement of their loss. Thakvar made his own statement, admitting that the system had been disputed for generations, and that both sides had valid claims. It was a small concession, but for a Krellian warrior to publicly acknowledge any limitation to their territorial rights was unprecedented. The Joint Security Force began operations the following month. The first patrol included both Krellian and Xanthari ships working together. There were incidents and arguments, but they worked through them. Slowly, hesitantly, the two sides began to trust each other. Back at the council station, Daniel received a private message from Xylara. "You have proven the worth of the diplomatic corps beyond any doubt. 300 deaths are a tragedy, but you prevented 300,000. The council wishes to expand the corps significantly. We want to establish diplomatic training programs on every member world." Daniel read the message twice, feeling the weight of it. This was what he had hoped for. But it was also overwhelming. The diplomatic corps was still small, still learning. Could they really train thousands of beings from dozens of species? He called a meeting of his senior staff. Zekmol, Kate, Lyra, Corvan, and Vekthor all gathered in his office. He shared Xylara's message and asked for their honest opinions. "We're not ready," Kate said immediately. "We barely survived this crisis. We need more experience, more training, more." "We will never be completely ready," Lyra interrupted gently. "Change is messy, but the alternative is to wait, while more people die in conflicts we might have prevented." "The Luminar is correct," Vekthor rumbled. "In war, you never feel ready. You act anyway, because the cost of inaction is too high." Corvan nodded. "We train as we go. We make mistakes and learn from them. It is the warrior way, applied to peace instead of combat." Zekmol, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Director Cross, a year ago, I was just another soldier, trying to prove myself. You changed my life by believing I could be more. If we expand the core, we give others that same chance. How can we refuse? 1. Daniel looked at his team. These beings from different worlds who had learned to work together. They were right. It would be hard. They would make mistakes. But doing nothing was not an option. All right, he said. We'll do it. But we do it carefully, thoughtfully. We create standards and training protocols. We don't just rush out and hope for the best. Over the next year, the diplomatic corps grew from 47 members to over 200. Training centers opened on 5 different worlds. Each program was adapted to local cultures while maintaining core principles: listening, understanding, finding common ground, seeking solutions that addressed real needs rather than just demands. Not every mediation succeeded. The Corps lost its first member when a negotiation on a remote colony turned violent. A young human named Peter Kane was killed trying to protect civilians from armed insurgents. His death shook the entire organization. Some members resigned, feeling that the work was too dangerous without military support. Daniel spoke at Peter's memorial service. He did not pretend the death was meaningless or easy to accept. He acknowledged the fear and doubt everyone felt. But he also reminded them why they did this work. Peter had saved 17 civilians before he died. Those 17 people were alive because someone had tried to talk instead of shoot. We cannot save everyone, Daniel said to the assembled mourners. We cannot prevent every death or solve every conflict. But we can try. And in trying, we honor every person who has died in senseless wars. We prove that there is another way, even when that way is hard and dangerous. Peter knew the risks. He chose this path anyway. We honor him not by giving up, but by continuing the work he believed in. The speech was broadcast across council space. It resonated with people who were tired of war, who wanted to believe that peace was possible. Applications to join the diplomatic corps increased. New training centers opened. Species that had been skeptical began to reconsider. 3 years after Daniel's trials, the Galactic Council held a special session. Zylara announced a new initiative, the Peace Priority Doctrine. Moving forward, all first contact situations would begin with diplomatic outreach. Military forces would be present but not primary. The diplomatic corps would have authority to negotiate before weapons were deployed. Not everyone supported it. Several militaristic species threatened to leave the council, but others, especially younger civilizations and those tired of constant military buildups, embraced the change. The council was splitting, not violently but philosophically, into those who still believed might made right and those willing to try something different. Daniel watched from the observation gallery as the vote was taken. The Peace Priority Doctrine passed with 62% support. It was not overwhelming, but it was enough. The galaxy was changing. That night, he video called his daughter back on Earth. She was finishing her medical residency, specializing in trauma surgery. I saw the vote, she said. Dad, you're changing the universe. Not just me, Daniel replied. Thousands of people are doing the real work. I just got lucky and became the face of it. Still, his daughter smiled. I'm proud of you. Mom would have been too. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. His wife had died 5 years before humanity made first contact, never knowing that her husband would one day stand before the galaxy and change how civilizations met each other. I hope so, he said softly. Back on the council station, Zekmal was teaching a new class of recruits. He told them Daniel's story about the unarmed human who had faced trials designed to break him and had won through understanding rather than force. He told them about the Krelian-Xanthari crisis and how words had prevented a war. He told them about Peter Kane and the price that peace sometimes demanded. You are training to be the first line of contact between civilizations, Zekmal told the young beings before him. You will face fear, anger, and violence. You will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. Some of you will fail. Some of you may die. But you will also have the chance to save lives, prevent wars, and prove that intelligence can overcome instinct. You will show the galaxy that we are more than our weapons. The recruits listened with a mixture of excitement and terror. They had signed up for something unprecedented, something that went against millions of years of evolutionary programming, that said strangers were threats, but they had also seen proof that it could work. The human in the simple blue suit, who had walked unarmed into the unknown and emerged having changed the rules of an empire, 12,000 years old. Across the galaxy, the phrase, "the human way," had evolved. It no longer just meant humanity's approach. It meant any approach that chose understanding over assumption, dialogue over destruction, patience over panic. It meant having the courage to be vulnerable in the hope of creating something better. The universe was still dangerous. Wars still happened. People still died. But now, there was an alternative. A choice that had not existed before Daniel Cross stepped out of his shuttle with empty hands and an open heart. And that choice, once offered, could never be completely taken away. The story of the unarmed ambassador spread beyond Council space, carried by traders and explorers to civilizations that had never heard of Earth. Some dismissed it as fantasy. Others wondered if it could be true. A few brave souls decided to try it themselves, approaching strangers with words instead of weapons. Change spread slowly, like ripples on a vast ocean. And in time, future generations would look back at this moment as the turning point, when the galaxy learned that true power was not the ability to destroy, but the strength to choose not to. Daniel Cross, the former mediator from Seattle, had become a symbol of that choice. But he would have been the first to say that symbols only matter if people act on them. The real heroes were the thousands of beings who took the harder path every day, who walked into conflicts knowing they might fail, who chose to try anyway. Because that was the lesson humanity had learned and shared with the stars. That trying, even in the face of overwhelming odds, even knowing you might fail, even when it would be easier to give up, that was the truest form of strength the universe had ever known. We are stronger together. I know. Daniel smiled. I'm just hoping we're strong enough. There are still species that think we're fools. Still conflicts that words won't solve. Still people who believe that might makes right. Then we show them different. Zekmal said firmly. One mediation at a time. One conversation at a time. The same way you showed me. Daniel nodded. The young Vexer was right. Change would not come overnight. There would be setbacks and failures. People would die while they were still learning how to do this better. But for the first time in galactic history, there was an alternative to the old ways. A choice that had not existed before. Across the galaxy, other species were watching and wondering. Some with hope, some with skepticism, some with active hostility. But they were all watching. The human who came unarmed had survived, and in surviving, had planted a seed. Whether that seed would grow into something beautiful or wither in the harsh light of reality remained to be seen, but it had been planted. And that was how all change began. As Daniel left the chamber, Zekmal was waiting for him. The young Vexer bowed formally. I wish to be the first to join your diplomatic corps. You showed me that strength comes in forms I never imagined. I want to learn more. My. Others joined them as they walked through the station. A Krellian warrior who was tired of fighting. A Luminar scholar who had always believed there was a better way. A human military officer who had secretly watched from Earth and volunteered to come help. One by one, they gathered. A strange group united by the simple idea that maybe, just maybe, there was a better way to move through the universe. The galaxy was watching now. The story of the unarmed human ambassador was spreading faster than light, carried by quantum communicators to every corner of known space. Some species scoffed. Others wondered. A few began to dream of what might be possible. "I'll do this," he said quietly. "You have not hurt me, not even tried. How can I hurt you?" Daniel walked over and offered his hand. Zekmal stared at it for a moment, then took it. Daniel helped him to his feet. The arena was completely silent. No one knew what to do with what they had just witnessed. Xylara's voice was uncertain for the first time. "The human has won without landing a blow. This is unprecedented. The council must deliberate on whether this constitutes a true victory." "He won!" Vekthor's voice boomed across the arena. The Krellian warrior stood in his seat. The Vexer surrendered. That is victory. The human proceeds to the third trial. The crowd erupted in argument and debate. But Daniel and Zekmal stood in the center of the arena, shaking hands like old friends. Something had changed in the young Vexer's eyes. He had entered the arena to prove his strength through violence. He left it having learned that there were other ways to be strong. "It doesn't matter. I came here to prove that humanity deserves a voice in the galaxy. I'll do whatever is necessary." They were bid Galaxy 1. We for Morbi 22-6. Xylara's form pulsed with light. "Very well. You will face 3 trials. The first is the test of survival. You will be placed in an environment that has killed trained soldiers. If you survive 12 hours, you will proceed to the second trial. If you fail, your species will be denied. Council membership for 100 years. Do you still accept?" Daniel thought about his daughter back on Earth. He thought about Laura's faith in him. He thought about all the people who believed humanity had something valuable to offer the galaxy. "I accept," he said. "Then you will begin at dawn," Xylara declared. "Guards, take him to the preparation chambers." Council dismissed. The platform lowered, and Daniel was led away. Behind him, the chamber erupted in conversation. Some species were already placing bets on how long the human would survive. Others were curious about what Earth's real plan might be. A few, the oldest and wisest, simply watched and wondered what kind of species would send an unarmed man to face the unknown. Where was a seat, a sleeping area, a small bathroom, and a computer loaded with every book, song, and piece of art humanity had ever created. Daniel spent his last week on Earth saying goodbye. His daughter cried and made him promise to come home. His mother hugged him and told him she was proud. His colleagues threw him a small party and gave him a gift, a smooth riverstone they had all signed. They told him to keep it in his pocket to remember that even the hardest edges could be worn smooth with time and patience. The launch day arrived on a bright morning in March. Daniel walked through Luna Station wearing a simple blue suit. No military uniform. No weapons. Just a man with a small bag and a riverstone in his pocket. The crowd was silent as he boarded Simple Truth. Some people thought he was incredibly brave. Others thought he was going to his death. Laura met him at the airlock. She shook his hand and looked him in the eye. She told him that no matter what happened, he had already changed history. He was proof that humanity had grown beyond their violent past. The door sealed behind him. Daniel sat in the pilot's seat and looked at Earth through the viewport. It was beautiful from here. A blue marble floating in the darkness. He thought about all the people down there, going about their lives, hoping he would succeed. He thought about all the mistakes humanity had made and all the lessons they had learned. The engines fired. Simple Truth pulled away from Luna Station and began its journey into deep space. Daniel watched Earth shrink behind him until it was just another star in the darkness. He was alone now. Truly alone. Heading toward a civilization that respected only strength and carrying nothing but his conviction that there was more than one kind of power. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had spent centuries discovering, that the strongest person in the room is often the one who does not need to prove it.